Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Finca La Colombia Anaerobic Honey Processed Colombia from Father's Coffee Roastery. And there's the bag right there. And Father's based out of Ostrava, Czech Republic, and this is their first ever appearance on this channel and the first time we've ever featured a Czech-based coffee roaster. And in the name of transparency, I must state that I am of Czech descent, so there's a little bit of bias going into this review. However, it has been really nice to see a Czech-based coffee roaster earn some notoriety within the coffee community, as I've noticed a lot of major multi-roasters start carrying their coffee, including a coffee shop nearby, which is where I picked this one up. Now let's discuss this coffee real quick, as a lot of people will probably look at it and say, hey, you really dislike anaerobic processed Colombian coffees, and yes, that is very true. However, the reason I wanted to give this one a shot was because of the variety. This is the Chiroso variety, which has been a very interesting variety this year. It's made for a lot of interesting reviews, so I felt that that might justify a processing method with an origin that I don't necessarily enjoy. And we'll see how it turned out, because I definitely found this one to be an interesting coffee. This right here is day 30. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 201 degree Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee, this one obviously being an experimental processed coffee is kind of interesting. I would say that it's pretty light relative to, well, what you might expect. Even with that, they do have espresso and filter roasts. This one right here is a filter roast, so I feel like they roast lighter in general, even with this one possibly being a little bit more developed than typical based off of the processing method. But even then, I would say that as a whole, they definitely roast on the slightly lighter side of things, but nothing that's necessarily as light as a lot of the true Nordic light coffee roasters. Hopefully that gives you a good idea. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and the cup did have a slight fermenty berry quality to it in the aroma. It was also present in the cup itself. It was definitely in a more subdued manner. I was kind of worried from this first impression that we were definitely going to be experiencing a lot of the heavy fermenty berry, a lot of it because of the processing method, and it definitely felt like it was there. There was a slight sort of smoky quality to the cup as well. It's a little bit more in the background, and the cup just felt really complex as there was a caramelized aspect and the significant amount of citrus was present as the cup had cooled. So complex from that first impression, not necessarily my favorite. Day 16, ran it through the Chemex, and this wasn't actually much better, as there was a slightly grainy berry quality to the cup that I described as somewhat reminiscent of Frankenberry cereal. The brightness that followed was plenty of the listed lime that they have on here. They have very few flavor notes on here, but the citrus that they had on here, yes, I could definitely see that, especially in the finish. There was this interesting silky mouthfeel to the cup as it maintains the line between being semi-clean to, well, a little overly fermenting. Not necessarily the best still. Day 18. Back through the Chemex, and this time the cup was coming out a little cleaner, so I haven't necessarily deviated from our standard recipe too much at this point yet, as I expected the coffee to continue to skew in the heavy berry direction. However, this time it's starting to experience a little bit more depth to it as well, with this almost honey-like component to it and a bit of candied stone fruit. So it continues to remain this complex cup. For the reference, they have a gooseberry, a chamomile, and a lime note listed on here, so not too much, not necessarily in line with what I was getting up to this point, with the exception of the citrus in the finish. Day 20, back through the V60, and it still maintains a little bit of its clarity. However, it does have a lot more of the berry sweetness in a slightly more tame manner. It definitely came out a little bit more grainy and slightly more fermenty in the V60, as I don't necessarily think I enjoyed this coffee too much in the V60. Slight apricot-like quality yet again, so decent cup, liking it a little bit more with each day, but still some work to be done. Day 22, back through the Chemex, and this was when I started to feel that this coffee was trending in the right direction, because it still came out slightly fermenty, but it was cleaner. The berry sweetness is the most notable aspect on the forefront of this coffee, with a bright citrus in the finish. Yet again, a lot in line with what they have listed on here, but there's also this slight savory component to kind of complement all of those other attributes, and I think that's kind of where the chamomile comes into play, but it continues to have that really strong lasting citric finish to it. There's still more to come from this coffee. Day 24, back through the Chemex, and I wanted to try this, back through the V60, and I wanted to try this one more time, as the fermented berry really start to ramp up. I think with a little bit more time, the fermenty aspects and the vibrancy of this coffee just really started to increase a lot. And that's why the V60 didn't really seem to be the best for it, as the Chemex was really cleaning up a lot of that. Felt somewhat unbalanced. A little bit of that cereal grain yet again. This bitter citrus, not quite as good. Day 26. Here's where the coffee actually starts to get pretty decent, as it becomes increasingly more vibrant. However, it's a lot cleaner, and that's a huge selling point to me, as there's a very sweet berry component yet again on the forefront. However, this time it's not an overly fermenty berry. It's actually a slightly more clean side of the berry, finishing off with a lot more of that citrus as well. Also a cleaner citrus. So I've lost a lot of the graininess, I've lost a lot of the fermentiness, and the cup actually begins to open up too, as I'm experiencing a lot more of that initial stone fruit, what I describe as an apricot yogurt, and this honey sweetness with a slight smokiness to the cup. That's actually interesting on the smokiness, because with this Chirroso variety, I have definitely experienced smokiness with all the coffees I've had from it. So I think it's actually something a little bit more in line with the variety as opposed to the actual, we'll say, roasting of the coffee itself. Day 28, final notes we have, cup continues to improve greatly with each cup, and that's what I have to say is here on day 30, it's actually the best it's been, and I'm continuing to brew it with the Chemex, but I'm actually lowering the temperatures, and I feel like it was already somewhat clean, but that's even cleaning up that fermenty aspect much more. Cleanest it's been to this point while still being very vibrant, and it's continuing to skew in the vibrant direction, so that's going to be a huge selling point to me. Decreasing in terms of the fermenty, lack of clarity, but increasing in the terms of vibrancy, great. In addition to that, there's a cleaner fruit, a sweeter berry, apricot, honey, and yogurt. Yet again, best day of the coffee to this point. Day 30, best day of the coffee to this point. So I definitely feel like this is one where it's a 5 weeks plus coffee. It's going to continue to get better, and I have a little bit left, so I'm definitely going to come back and see if that becomes the case. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And a lot of level 4s, so let's go through those real quick. The body at a level 4, yes, interestingly, even with the Chemex, it is on the higher side of the body. So I actually agree with that. One of the more, we'll say, fuller bodied cups of coffee we've reviewed, especially pertaining to the Chemex, so that's kind of interesting in that. Level 4 for the finish. That's actually really, really good. For an anaerobic honey processed Colombian coffee, I am so used to those being ridiculously overbearing, over the top. So I really like it there. Even though it does have that citric finish to it, it actually comes out a lot more even than I typically experience, where it usually comes out very heavy on the berry side of things. Sweetness, level 4. Higher side of level 4. It's a very sweet cup of coffee, and you'd expect that with the processing method that they have on here, it would be pretty sweet. So definitely justified there. The acidity at a level 4, yes, it's quite the acidic cup of coffee, and I don't really know what to really attribute that to, but I mean, it's just acidic in general, and I don't necessarily mind given that the sweetness is a little bit higher than the acidity in the cup. Berry fruit level 3, correction, level 4, yes, definitely most consistent note throughout the time drinking it. At times it was a little bit more fermenty, but with time and with a decrease in the temperatures, it has cleaned up quite a bit, and at this moment it's a much cleaner, sweeter berry, so I really like it at that level 4 mark. Most distinct flavor profile to this coffee. Citrus fruit, level 4. Interestingly, I feel like with a little bit more time, it hasn't been as vibrant as it had been on the earlier days, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for me, but easily the second most dominant factor and quite consistent throughout the time drinking it. Stone fruit, I actually want to bump that up to a level 3. I'm not entirely sure why it's at a level 2. It was pretty consistent as well throughout the time drinking this coffee. Maybe it could have been lost in the slightly more heavy berry at times, or the more lingering, lasting lime aspect in this coffee, but I would say it definitely had its time where it was quite pronounced in the cup as well. A couple of level 3s. Let's go with the savoriness at the level 3 mark. Yeah, I kind of mentioned that the chamomile, that's probably what it's attributed to. It does have that black tea-like aspect to it in terms of the flavor anyway, so that's why it has a little bit of savoriness to it. Bitter level 3, that's a lot to do with the citrus. It is a little bit of a bitter citrus to the cup, but as the citrus is kind of toned down, as has the bitterness. Smokiness, level 3. And I said that it might be the variety because that's kind of the same case. Last time we reviewed the Chirroso variety, it also had a fair bit of smokiness to it. So not entirely sure what that is or where it's coming from, but it definitely feels like a level 3 for me. Again, with a little bit of time and reducing the temperatures, it's actually toned down a little bit. And then the most important thing we must discuss in this entire tasting wheel is the clarity, the cleanliness at a level 3. It's surprisingly at this time on the higher side of the level 3. That's the best part of this coffee by a wide margin, because anaerobic processed Colombians, I think very rarely score above a 1 for the clarity. They are such murky, such fermenty, such heavy coffees that reaching a level 2 is pretty decent, reaching a level 3 is great, and reaching the higher side of a level 3 is exceptional. So I really like the clarity in this coffee. I was really surprised by the clarity in this coffee. I honestly just thought it was going to be a little too heavy and overbearing. And that's why sometimes you trust your guts. The variety really did play a huge role and factor, and you gotta give credit to the coffee roaster for also keeping that down and providing a lot more clarity in the cup. So I really love the way that this tasting wheel looks. I think it's a very accurate representation of what we were getting from this coffee, with the exception of that stone fruit. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, I actually really liked it. It grew on me a lot. So it did take a lot of time, as you saw. There were 6 days, 5 to 6 days where I wasn't necessarily in love with this coffee. It just took a lot of adjustments, and I think that the best of this coffee is still yet to come. And what was great about this coffee was the really nice clarity, the great fruit sweetness, the complexity, the depth, and just overall a lot of attributes you could really pick out from this coffee, a lot of different flavor profiles. So this one was a really nice one, and that's not even kind of comparing it alongside its contemporaries. That's pretty well documented to this point. I don't like anaerobic processed Colombian coffees, arguably if not my least favorite coffee out there. So credit to Fathers for doing a really good job with this one. Probably my favorite anaerobic Colombian coffee I've ever had, so really nice in that sense. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to: if you have liked the anaerobic coffees, you like the real great depth, sweetness, vibrancy, especially the fruit sweetness, but have been looking for something a little cleaner, I think this is a great fit, because that really goes in line with that. I've always wondered what would happen if you could clean up those really vibrant flavors and provide a much more clean cup, and that's what this one is. So that's really great, and it provides you with so much depth and complexity, as well as there goes far beyond just the simple notes that they have listed on here. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Finca La Colombia Anaerobic Honey Processed Colombia from Father's Coffee Roastery. Thank you for watching.